Okay, so this is to go over the event loop in JavaScript. So in JavaScript, the JavaScript engine waits for tasks, it executes them, and then it sleeps. So that is the kind of, I suppose, the simple concept of the event loop. So in the scenario where there is a task being executed and another event comes in, what happens is that new task gets put onto what's called the event queue or the macrotask queue. So these could be anything like mouse move event being triggered, a set timeout callback being triggered, promise completing, so the resolve or the reject. Then we also have a second queue, which is called the microtask queue. This is specific to the to promises and asynchronous callback handlers. So it's also actually known as promise jobs queue. So I'll just list them out here. So we've got the macro task queue, and we have our micro task queue. So also known as our promise jobs. So those two queues are checked by the JavaScript engine for any new tasks after it completes a task. So the microtask queue is checked first, and then if that is empty, it'll move on to the macrotask queue and execute any of the tasks in there. So some examples, as I said, of the macrotask queue event will be a set timeout callback, so promise resolve or promise completion, the loading of an external script, and then the microtask would have dot then dot finally dot catch. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll just go over some basic examples of how JavaScript handles events, and we'll fill out our own manual macrotask queue and microtask queue to explain as we go along. Okay, so we're going to start off here. We have our console.log one. So we're going to do the next is a set timeout. We're going to do an immediate call to console.log. Number two, we're not going to put in a timeout or a timeout value here, so that it will get added immediately to the queue, and we can see the result then of how the JavaScript engine handles it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're just going to talk through the queue, and we're going to write out here what we're expecting the result to be when we run this script. So straight off the bat, if the console log statement should print out number one as it executes that log statement. The next statement to execute would be the set timeout. We know that there's an automatic or a default delay of, or a minimum delay of 4 milliseconds. So when that completes, it'll be added to the macrotask queue. Then the console.log tree will be printed out. So over here we'll see our set timeout with our number 2, and here then we're going to go on to line 7. We see our console log out of tree. So JavaScript engine then will say, okay, it's completed the last item in the script. What, if any, microtask events are available to complete, or that still need to be run or handled? You can see here from the microtask event queue there are none. Then it says, okay, what about the macrotask queue? So it sees here the set timeout callback, which is our console log 2, needs to be executed. So then it executes that. It removes it from the script, or sorry, from the queue, and then it checks again. Okay, the microtask queue, is there anything there that I can execute? Nope. The macrotask queue, is there anything there I can execute? Nope. Okay, I'll sleep until there's an event that appears that I need to handle and execute. So now when we do a node event loop, what we're expecting to see is 1, 3, 2 printed out. Okay, great. So our manual interpretation of the event loop and the macrotask queue and the microtask queue is as expected. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to add in here is going to be some promises. So promise.resolve, then we're going to do a console.log, and we're going to print out number 4. And we'll also do a console.log afterwards, just to make things very clear about how things are working. Okay, so straight off the bat again, the code is being run, or sorry, the script is being run. This line here, console.log1, gets executed, so it prints out number 1. The next line here, set timeout, gets added to our macro task as the first event to be executed when possible. So set timeout. I'm just going to do 2. JavaScript engine then moves on to the next line here. It says, please print out. It prints out number 3, or it executes it, the console log statement. Then the next item to execute is the promise.resolve. And remember, with the promise.resolves and with promises, the handlers .then, .finally, .catch are all handled on the microtask queue. So what happens here is we add a .then with our console log of 4, that task to the microtask queue. Next, the JavaScript engine executes the console log statement number 5. So prints out number 5. So after this console log statement executes, the JavaScript engine says, okay, are there any microtask events that need to be executed? Yes, there are. This .then. So it removes it from the microtask queue and executes it. So we're going to print out console log 4. So then the JavaScript engine completes that and says, okay, are there any microtask queues items to be executed? No. Okay, move on to the macrotask queue. Okay, are there items to be executed here? Yes, the set timeout callback. So we see it's a console log of 2. So it removes the task from the macrotask queue and brings it in and executes it. So what we're expecting now to see in our printout is 1, 3, 5, 4, 2. Okay. So we see it here, 1, 3, 5, 4, 2. Fantastic. Okay, so the next thing you might be wondering about is what happens when there are multiple handlers here. So say when we have a .then and a .finally. And also what would happen if we have multiple promises. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove that console.log. I'm going to add a .finally. I'm going to do a console.log of 5 here. And I'm actually going to double up on the promises so we can see how promises are actually handled together. So I'm going to update the numbers here to be 6, 7. And we're going to add in a console.log of 8. Okay. So now we'll go through this line by line again. So as previous, the first line gets executed, 1 gets printed out. Our set timeout gets executed and it's added to our macro task queue. So I'll set timeout 2. Okay. Next, our console log 3 statement gets executed, prints out number 3. Next, our promise.resolve gets executed and we add .then to our microtask queue. 4. Okay. Now we move on to the next promise here. So our promise.resolve gets executed and our .then gets added or pushed on to our microtask queue. So as mentioned previously, it's first in, first out for the microtask queue and for the macrotask queue. So 6. That's our console log statement 6 there. So the next statement to be executed is the console log of number 8. So we see 138 printed out so far. Okay, so now the JavaScript engine says what are the next microtask queues, queue items to be executed if there are any. So it looks in the microtask queue and it says, okay, we have an item here at the top, or the number one item in that list. So remember, it's first in, first out. So this .then needs to be executed. So that correlates to this line here. So our console log 4 gets executed. And then what happens is it gets removed from the microtask list. The other item that was there, or the remaining item, moves to the top. Also, after the .then gets executed, the .finally asynchronous handler gets pushed onto the microtask queue as 5. So this is important to note that it only gets added after the .then was completed or executed. Okay, so now the JavaScript engine says, okay, what microtasks are to be executed next. So it goes back to the microtask queue and it sees this .then with a console log of 6. So this line here to be executed. So it says, okay, execute that, remove it from the list, or sorry, remove it from the queue. The .finally from the other promise gets bumped up to number 1. And what we're also going to add in here now is the .finally from this promise with our console log of number 7. So again, similar to the other promise, when that .then got executed, the .finally got pushed onto the microtask queue. Now when this promise console log 6 gets executed, the finally handler gets pushed onto the microtask queue as well. So that gets pushed on, finally, number 6. Sorry, number 7. So you can see it there. Okay, so now the JavaScript engine says, okay, that's complete. So it's printed out number 6. What task should I complete next? So it goes back to the microtask queue, sees this .finally needs to be executed, which correlates to this one here. So it does a console log statement of 5. It removes the finally console log statement of 5 from the microtask queue, and the remaining task gets bumped up to number 1. So JavaScript engine says, okay, I've completed that console log 5. What do I execute next? It goes and looks in the microtask queue, it sees this remaining finally task, and this correlates to this console.log statement here. So then it prints out console.log 7, and it removes the .finally console.log 7 from the microtask queue. So now the JavaScript engine says, okay, what task do I complete next? It goes to the microtask queue. There are no items remaining. Okay, it goes then to the macrotask queue. It says, okay, is there anything there? Yes, there is. The set timeout. Now, this has the callback of the console log number 2 there. So that gets executed, and just like the other queue, the event gets or the task gets removed from that macrotask queue. Now the JavaScript engine says, okay, what do I execute next? It goes and checks the microtask queue. There's nothing there. Then it checks the macrotask queue. There's nothing there. Then it will go to sleep, and that is that for the engine. While it sleeps, it will wait for any new tasks to appear to execute. So in the browser, that could be, a new mouse event, a new loading of a script, something like that. Whereas here with the script that I'm running, the script will complete. So now we'll run the script, our event loop.js, and we'll compare the numbers that are printed out. So 1, 1, 3, 3, 8, 8, 4, 4, 6, 6, 5, 5, 7, 7, 2, 2. Okay, so that has been the walkthrough of the event loop in JavaScript.